The wind howled like 1,000 wolves prowling through the darkness, and Nathan Quinn knew from decades of living in these God-forsaken mountains that this storm would claim lives before morning broke. Snow fell so thick he could barely see 3 feet ahead of his horse as he urged the exhausted animal forward through the drifts that already reached past his stirrups. He had been a fool to check his trap lines this late in November of 1882, but the pelts fetched good money in Fort Davis, Texas, and money was something he desperately needed before winter truly set its teeth into the high country. The town lay far below in the flatter lands, but up here in the Olympia Mountains, storms could turn deadly in minutes. Nathan was 32 years old and had lived alone in his cabin for the past 8 years, ever since his parents had died from fever. He had grown accustomed to solitude, even found a strange comfort in it. No one to disappoint, no one to lose, no one to watch die. The loneliness had carved lines into his weathered face and turned his dark brown hair prematurely gray at the temples, but he told himself he preferred it this way. His horse suddenly whinnied and reared, nearly throwing him from the saddle. Nathan fought to control the frightened animal, his frozen fingers struggling with the reins. That was when he saw what had spooked the gelding. A dark shape lay half buried in the snow just off the trail, barely visible in the white chaos swirling around them. For a moment, Nathan considered riding past. Whatever it was likely already dead, and he had his own survival to worry about. His cabin was still a good 45 minutes away, and the temperature was dropping fast enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. But something made him dismount. Some persistent tug of conscience he thought he had buried along with his family. He trudged through the snow, each step an effort until he reached the dark shape. His breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, curled on her side, her lips blue and her skin pale as the snow surrounding her. She wore a torn dress wholly inadequate for this weather, and her dark hair was matted with ice. Blood stained the snow near her head. Nathan dropped to his knees beside her, pulling off his glove to check for a pulse. There, weak but present, a flutter of life against his fingertips. She was alive, though barely. He had no idea how she had gotten up here or what had happened to her, but those questions would have to wait. If he did not get her to shelter immediately, she would be dead within the hour. Nathan scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she was, and lifted her onto his horse before climbing up behind her. He wrapped his heavy coat around them both, holding her against his chest as he urged his horse forward into the blizzard. The ride to his cabin felt eternal. Nathan talked to the woman the whole way, even though she could not hear him, telling her to hold on, that help was coming, that she would be all right. He was not sure if he was trying to comfort her or himself. The wind tore his words away the moment they left his lips. When the familiar shape of his cabin finally materialized through the white curtain of snow, relief flooded through him so powerfully his hands shook. He half fell off his horse, still clutching the unconscious woman, and stumbled to the door. His horse would have to wait. The animal was hardy and could shelter behind the cabin until Nathan could get the woman inside and build up the fire. The cabin was bitterly cold, but it was shelter from the wind. Nathan kicked the door shut behind him and carried the woman to his bed, the only bed in the small one-room structure. He had built the cabin himself, solid logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, shelves for supplies, hooks for his coat and guns, and the bed tucked in the far corner. It was not much, but it had kept him alive through 8 hard winters. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, lighting the fire he had left ready in the hearth that morning. Flames caught and spread, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Only then did he turn his full attention to the woman. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with delicate features and long dark hair that was starting to thaw and drip onto his pillow. The blood on her head came from a gash along her hairline, but it had already stopped bleeding. Her dress was indeed torn in several places, and Nathan tried not to think about what that might mean. What he did know was that she would die if he did not warm her up quickly. He had seen frostbite before, had lost 2 toes to it himself one brutal winter. Her fingers and toes would need careful attention, but first he had to raise her core temperature. Nathan grabbed every blanket he owned, piling them on top of her. He pulled off her frozen shoes and stockings, checking her feet. They were pale but not yet blackened, which was a good sign. Her hands were the same. The fire was roaring now, filling the cabin with blessed warmth. Nathan pulled his spare chair beside the bed and sat down, suddenly exhausted. The clock on his shelf showed it was past 9 at night. He should go take care of his horse, should check the woman's injuries more thoroughly, should do a dozen things. But for a long moment he simply sat there, watching her breathe. Who was she? How had she ended up half frozen in the mountains during a blizzard? The questions tumbled through his mind, but answers would have to wait until she woke up. If she woke up, Nathan forced himself to stand. He had brought her this far. He was not about to lose her now through negligence. He went back out into the storm, fighting his way to where his horse stood shivering behind the cabin. He led the animal to the small lean-to he used as a stable, stripped off the saddle, and rubbed the horse down with handfuls of dry straw. He gave the gelding extra grain and fresh water from the barrel he kept in the shelter, then made his way back to the cabin. Inside, he stripped off his own wet clothes and changed into dry long johns and woolen pants. The warmth of the fire was starting to penetrate his bones, and he felt the exhaustion of the day settling over him like a heavy blanket. But there was still work to do. He heated water over the fire and carefully cleaned the wound on the woman's head. It was not as bad as it had looked initially, just a shallow gash that had bled more than it should have. He had seen worse. He bandaged it with clean cloth, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he worked. Her breathing was stronger now, more regular. Color was returning to her cheeks. Nathan allowed himself a small measure of hope. He pulled a chair close to the fire and settled in to keep watch. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, 2 survivors clung to warmth and life. Nathan dozed fitfully through the night, waking every hour to check on the woman and add wood to the fire. Each time, she was still breathing, still fighting. Tough, he thought. She had to be tough to have survived this long in the cold. Dawn broke gray and bitter, the storm still howling outside. Nathan made coffee and fried bacon, the smell filling the small cabin. He was stirring cornmeal into boiling water for mush when he heard a sound from the bed. He turned to see the woman's eyes flutter open. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, confusion clear on her face. Then her eyes found him and he saw fear flash across her features. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain, and fell back against the pillows. "Easy," Nathan said, setting down his spoon and approaching slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "You are safe. I found you in the blizzard last night. You were nearly frozen to death." The woman's hand went to her head, touching the bandage. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Where am I? My cabin. About 12 miles up in the mountains from Fort Davis." He stayed where he was, giving her space. "I am Nathan Quinn. What is your name?" She was silent for a long moment, her green eyes studying him with an intensity that made him oddly uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. Nora Baker." "Well, Miss Baker, you gave me quite a scare last night. What were you doing out in that storm?" Nora's face paled further, if that was possible, and her hand gripped the blankets. "I was running. There was a wagon and we were attacked. Outlaws, I think. They killed the driver and the guard. I managed to get away, but they chased me. I ran into the storm, hoping to lose them in the snow." Nathan felt anger kindle in his chest. Outlaws were a constant plague in West Texas, preying on travelers and small settlements. "Did they hurt you?" "One of them grabbed me, tore my dress. I hit him with a rock and ran." She touched her head again. "I must have fallen. I remember running, and then everything went dark and cold. You are lucky I found you when I did. Another hour and you would have been gone." Nathan moved to the stove and poured coffee into a tin cup. "Can you drink something? You need to get warm from the inside, too." Nora pushed herself into a sitting position, moving slowly. She accepted the cup with shaking hands. Nathan noticed she was still wearing her torn dress under the blankets. He went to his chest and pulled out a clean flannel shirt and a pair of woolen socks. "These will be too big for you, but they are clean and warm. I will turn my back so you can change. Your dress is not fit to wear, and those clothes you have on are still damp." He saw her hesitate, weighing whether she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. Nathan turned to face the fireplace, staring into the flames while he listened to the rustle of fabric behind him. "You can turn around," she said after a few minutes. Nathan turned to find her dressed in his oversized shirt, which hung to her knees like a nightgown. The sleeves had been rolled up multiple times, and she had pulled on the woolen socks. Despite the absurdity of the outfit, she looked better. The coffee had brought more color to her cheeks. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I have bacon and cornmeal mush, nothing fancy." "I am starving," Nora admitted, and Nathan saw the first hint of a smile cross her face. It transformed her features, making her beautiful despite the bandage and the exhaustion etched into her face. He served them both, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the wind continued to howl. Nathan glanced at the window, though he could see nothing but white. "The storm shows no sign of stopping," he said. "Could last another day or two. We are stuck here until it blows itself out." Nora nodded slowly. "I am sorry to impose on you like this, Mr. Quinn." "Nathan," he corrected. "And you are not imposing. I would be a poor excuse for a man if I had left you out there to die." He paused. "What were you doing on the mountain road? Were you heading to Fort Davis, away from it, actually?" "I was traveling from Fort Davis to El Paso to take a position as a schoolteacher. The stage line said their wagons could handle the mountain route even with weather coming in." Bitterness crept into her voice. They were wrong. A schoolteacher. That explained the educated way she spoke, the intelligence in her eyes. Nathan found himself wanting to know more about her, this woman who had literally fallen into his life out of a blizzard. "Well, when the storm clears, I will take you down to Fort Davis myself. The trail to El Paso will be blocked for weeks once this much snow falls. You will have to wait until spring to continue your journey." Nora looked down at her hands, wrapped around the warm tin cup. "I spent nearly everything I had on that wagon fare. I do not know if I can afford to wait in Fort Davis until spring." Nathan thought about that while he finished his breakfast. He lived simply, but he had some money saved from his trapping and the odd jobs he did in town. Still, he barely knew this woman. The sensible thing would be to get her to town and let her figure out her own problems. But as he looked at her sitting in his bed, wearing his shirt, her dark hair drying in waves around her shoulders, he found he did not want to be sensible. "You could stay here," he heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised her. "I mean, just until spring. The cabin is small, but there is room. I could sleep by the fireplace. You would be safe here, and it would not cost you anything." Nora stared at him, her green eyes wide. "You do not even know me. Why would you make such an offer? Why, indeed?" Nathan struggled to put his feelings into words. "I have lived alone up here for 8 years. It gets pretty quiet." And if I am being honest, it would be nice to have someone to talk to who can talk back, instead of just my horse and the occasional deer." She smiled again, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up in a spring thaw. "That is kind of you, Nathan. But I am not sure it would be proper. A single woman, a single man, living alone together in an isolated cabin. People would talk. People in Fort Davis already think I am half wild from living up here alone. Let them talk." Nathan surprised himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Besides, no one has to know. The town is 12 miles away and I only go down there once or twice a month for supplies. By the time spring comes and you head to El Paso, it will all be forgotten." Nora was quiet for a long time, weighing his words. Finally, she nodded. "All right. I accept your offer, Nathan Quinn, but I insist on earning my keep. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, help with whatever you need. I will not be a burden." "You would not be a burden either way," Nathan said quietly. He stood and collected their empty plates. "But if it makes you feel better, I would not say no to decent cooking. I am not much good at anything beyond bacon and beans." They spent the rest of that day settling into an awkward sort of domesticity. The storm continued unabated outside, the wind shrieking around the cabin like a living thing. Inside, warmth and firelight held back the cold. Nora proved to be as good as her word about earning her keep. Despite her ordeal, she insisted on helping Nathan prepare their midday meal. She found his meager supplies and managed to make something far better than anything he had cooked for himself in years. She asked him questions about his stores and made lists of things he needed, her teacher's mind organizing and planning. Nathan found himself watching her when she was not looking, fascinated by the graceful way she moved around his rough cabin, making it seem somehow less bare and more like a home. He told himself it was just because he was not used to having another person around, but deep down he knew it was more than that. They talked while they worked, cautious at first but gradually opening up. Nathan told her about his parents, how they had homesteaded this land when he was a boy, how they had died and left him alone with nothing but the cabin and the mountains. He told her about his life as a trapper, the long, solitary days checking his lines, the occasional trip to Fort Davis for supplies and human contact. Nora told him about growing up in St. Louis, the youngest of 4 daughters. Her father had been a clerk, respectable but never wealthy. She had trained as a teacher because it was one of the few respectable professions available to a woman of her class. When her parents died within a year of each other, her older sisters had married and started their own families, but Nora had wanted more than to be dependent on a husband. So she had answered an advertisement for a teacher in El Paso, seeing it as an adventure and a chance to make her own way in the world. "I suppose the adventure found me a bit sooner than I expected," she said with a wry smile. They were sitting at the table, the remains of dinner between them. Outside, darkness had fallen and the storm continued its assault on the cabin. "You were brave to run into that blizzard," Nathan said. "Most people would have frozen from fear alone. I was not brave. I was terrified. But I knew what those men wanted to do to me, and I chose to take my chances with the storm instead." Nora's voice was steady, but Nathan saw her hands tremble slightly. "When I fell and everything went dark, I thought I was dying. I was actually surprised to wake up this morning." "I am glad you did," Nathan said quietly. Their eyes met across the table and he saw something shift in her expression, a softening. "So am I," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Nathan stood and began clearing the table and the spell was broken. But something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed. That night, Nathan made himself a pallet by the fireplace while Nora took his bed. He lay awake for a long time, listening to her soft breathing, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. The cabin felt different now, alive in a way it had not been for years. He told himself it was just because another person was here, but he knew he was lying. He was not sure when he fell asleep, but he woke suddenly in the darkness to the sound of crying. He sat up, disoriented, and saw Nora thrashing in the bed, still asleep but clearly in the grip of a nightmare. Nathan crossed to her quickly, kneeling beside the bed. "Nora, Nora, wake up. You are safe. It is just a dream." She woke with a gasp, her eyes wide and frightened in the dim glow from the banked fire. For a moment, she did not seem to recognize him. Then awareness returned, and she covered her face with her hands. "I am sorry. I did not mean to wake you." "You did not need to apologize for having nightmares after what you went through." Nathan found himself reaching out to touch her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. "Do you want to talk about it?" Nora shook her head, but then the words came spilling out anyway. "I keep seeing their faces, the outlaws. I keep running but never getting away. And the cold. I remember the cold so vividly, like I was freezing from the inside out. I thought I would die alone in the snow and no one would ever know what happened to me. But you did not die. You survived. You are safe here." Nathan surprised himself by sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand still on her shoulder. "I promise you, Nora, as long as you are in this cabin, nothing will harm you." She looked up at him, tears glistening on her cheeks. "You barely know me. Why do you care so much?" Nathan did not have a good answer for that, at least not one he was ready to voice. So instead, he said, "Because it is the right thing to do. Because I know what it is like to be alone and scared. Because you deserve someone to care." Nora reached up and covered his hand with hers. "Thank you, Nathan, for saving my life, for taking me in, for being kind. I will never forget it." They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and the fragile beginnings of trust. Then Nathan gently squeezed her shoulder and stood. "Try to get some sleep. I will be right here if you need anything." He returned to his pallet by the fire, but sleep was a long time coming. His shoulder still tingled where she had touched his hand. The storm blew itself out by the next afternoon, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of snow. Nathan spent the day digging out the cabin, checking on his horse, and making sure they had enough firewood to last through the coming weeks. Nora stayed inside, and when Nathan came in for meals, he found she had cleaned and organized the cabin, mended a pile of his clothes that he had been ignoring for months, and prepared food that made his mouth water. "You are making me look bad," he teased as he sat down to dinner that evening. "I have been living like an animal up here, apparently." Nora laughed, and the sound filled the cabin like music. "You have been surviving. There is a difference, but now that I am here, we might as well try to be civilized about it." Over the following days, they fell into a comfortable routine. Nathan would rise before dawn to check his trap lines, returning by midday with whatever he had caught. Nora would have coffee and a hot meal waiting. They would spend the afternoons working around the cabin, preparing for the deep winter ahead. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking or reading from Nathan's small collection of books. Nathan had not realized how much he had missed simple human companionship. He found himself hurrying through his work so he could get back to the cabin, back to Nora's smile and the sound of her voice. He caught himself thinking about her when he was supposed to be concentrating on his traps, wondering what she was doing, if she was thinking about him too. He was falling for her, he realized with a start one crisp December morning as he checked his lines. It had been less than 2 weeks since he had found her in the snow, but somehow she had become essential to his life, as necessary as air and water. The realization terrified him. He had spent 8 years building walls around his heart, protecting himself from loss and pain. Now this woman, this stranger, was dismantling those walls with her laughter and her kindness, and the way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention. What terrified him even more was that he was pretty sure she was falling for him too. It showed in little things. The way she would touch his hand when passing him a cup of coffee. The way her face would light up when he came through the door. The way she would lean close to him when they sat by the fire, her shoulder brushing his. The way she watched him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, but neither of them spoke of it. It felt too fragile, too new. So they existed in this strange limbo, growing closer every day but not quite ready to name what was building between them. Christmas came, and Nathan realized with a start that he had not celebrated the holiday in years. But Nora insisted. They had no decorations, so she cut pine boughs and arranged them around the cabin. Nathan shot a wild turkey, and Nora cooked it with skills that seemed almost magical given their limited supplies. They sat at the small table, the candles lit, the fire crackling, and shared the best meal Nathan could remember eating. "I did not get you a present," Nathan said, suddenly embarrassed. "I did not even think about it until this morning." Nora smiled across the table at him, her face soft in the candlelight. "You gave me the greatest present anyone could. You gave me my life. Everything else is just extra." Nathan felt his chest tighten with emotion. "I did not do anything special. I just found you and brought you here." "You did not just find me, Nathan. You chose to stop, chose to help, chose to bring me here and take care of me when you could have just left me to die. You opened your home and your life to a complete stranger. That is not nothing. That is everything." Their eyes met across the table, and Nathan saw his own feelings reflected back at him. The moment stretched, charged with possibility. He stood and moved around the table, and Nora rose to meet him. They stood facing each other, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath. "Nora," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you. I know it is crazy. I know it has only been a few weeks. I know you are planning to leave in the spring. But I cannot keep pretending that what I feel is just friendliness or compassion. It is more than that. You are more than that." Nora reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his rough cheek. "Nathan Quinn, I thought you would never say it. I have been falling in love with you since the day I woke up and saw you standing there, offering me coffee and safety. You saved me, but more than that, you made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth saving." Nathan pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she was made to be there. He tilted her chin up and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper as she responded. She tasted like turkey and wine and promises, and Nathan felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora was smiling through tears. "I was so scared to tell you. I thought maybe I was imagining things, or that you just felt sorry for me." "Sorry for you," Nathan laughed, the sound almost giddy. "Nora, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. That blizzard was a blessing in disguise bringing you here. I know I should not say that, considering what you went through, but I cannot help feeling grateful that of all the places you could have ended up, you ended up here. With me." "I am grateful too," Nora whispered. "I thought I was running toward a new life in El Paso, but maybe I was really running toward you all along." They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the world outside cold and distant. For the first time in 8 years, Nathan felt truly happy. The loneliness that had been his constant companion was gone, replaced by something warm and bright and utterly terrifying in its intensity. But it was a good kind of terrifying, the kind that made him feel alive. They spent the rest of that Christmas evening talking, making plans, imagining a future together. Nora would still need to go to El Paso in the spring, at least to send word that she would not be taking the teaching position. But after that, she said, she wanted to come back. She wanted to make a life with him, here in this cabin in the mountains. "Are you sure?" Nathan asked, needing to hear her say it again. "It is a hard life up here, isolated. Winters are brutal. You would be giving up a lot." "I would be gaining more," Nora said firmly. "I would be gaining you, Nathan. That is worth any hardship." As January arrived and deepened, their relationship deepened too. They were careful to maintain propriety, Nathan still sleeping by the fire while Nora took the bed. But the distance between them grew harder to maintain. They would find excuses to touch, to be close. Long looks across the cabin, hands that would linger when they brushed accidentally, stolen kisses when the longing became too much. One particularly cold night in mid-January, Nathan woke to find Nora crouched beside him, shivering despite the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately alert. "Are you sick?" "No, I am just cold. The temperature has dropped so much, and even under all the blankets, I cannot seem to get warm." She hesitated. "Could I stay down here by the fire with you, just to get warm?" Nathan knew it was a terrible idea even as he nodded and made room for her on his pallet. She lay down beside him, and he pulled the blankets over both of them. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls as they lay there, inches apart but not touching. "Thank you," Nora whispered. "I know this is not proper, but I promise I will go back to the bed once I warm up." "Take your time," Nathan said, though his heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. They lay in silence for a few minutes. Then Nora spoke again, her voice quiet in the darkness. "Nathan, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you ever think about what will happen when spring comes? About us?" Nathan rolled onto his side to face her. Her eyes were luminous in the firelight. "I think about it all the time. I think about how I will take you down to Fort Davis, and you will send your letter to El Paso, and then we will come back here together. I think about how I will need to build an addition to the cabin because one room is not enough. I think about marrying you properly, maybe riding down to town and having the preacher do it right. I think about what it would be like to spend every night beside you instead of across the room from you." Nora reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I think about those things too. I think about making this cabin a real home, about being your wife, about growing old together in these mountains. Is that crazy? If it is, then we are both crazy." Nathan squeezed her hand. "Nora Baker, will you marry me? I do not have a ring, and this is not a very romantic proposal, lying on the floor of a drafty cabin in the middle of winter. But I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you have me?" Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, catching the firelight. "Yes. Yes, of course I will marry you, Nathan Quinn. I love you too. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe. I love this cabin and these mountains and the life we can build together. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her, pouring all his love and promise into it. They held each other as the fire burned low, two people who had found each other against all odds, in the midst of a blizzard that had nearly killed one of them. Two lonely souls who were lonely no more. They did return Nora to the bed eventually, propriety winning out over desire. But something had changed between them with that proposal. They were engaged now, committed to a future together, and the knowledge made everything feel more real and solid. February brought more snow and howling winds, but inside the cabin, there was warmth and laughter and love. Nathan taught Nora how to tan hides and prepare pelts. She taught him how to read Shakespeare aloud with proper dramatic flair, making him perform all the different parts until they were both laughing too hard to continue. They played checkers with stones on a board Nathan carved. They cooked together, cleaned together, existed in a bubble of domestic happiness that felt almost unreal. But reality intruded one afternoon in late February when Nathan returned from checking his traps to find Nora white-faced and shaking. She stood at the window, staring out at the snowy landscape, her whole body tense. "What is wrong?" Nathan demanded, immediately going to her side. "I thought I saw someone out there, a man watching the cabin from the tree line." Her voice trembled. "It might have been my imagination, but Nathan, I could have sworn I saw him." Ice flooded Nathan's veins. "Did you recognize him? Could it have been one of the outlaws from the wagon?" "I do not know. I only saw him for a moment before he disappeared back into the trees." "But why would anyone else be up here in weather like this?" Nathan went to the window and scanned the tree line, but he saw nothing. Fresh snow was falling, which would have covered any tracks. "Stay inside and away from the windows. Bar the door after me. I am going to look around." "Nathan, no." "What if it is them? What if they hurt you?" "I will be careful." He loaded his rifle and checked his pistol. "But if someone is out there, I need to know about it. I need to keep you safe." He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the trust. She nodded and stepped back to let him go. Nathan went out into the snow, moving carefully, all his senses alert. He circled the cabin, looking for signs of disturbance, but the falling snow had covered everything. He moved out toward the tree line, his rifle ready. There, barely visible beneath the fresh snow, he saw them. Boot prints, definitely human, leading around the cabin and then back into the forest. Someone had been watching them. Nathan's blood rang cold. He followed the tracks for a quarter-mile into the trees, but they eventually disappeared in the heavy undergrowth. Whoever had been there was gone now. Nathan returned to the cabin, his mind racing. Nora let him in immediately, her face anxious. "Did you find anything?" "Tracks. Someone was definitely out there watching the cabin." Nathan secured the door and moved to check the windows. "We need to be careful. If those outlaws tracked you here, they might be planning something." "But how could they have found me? It has been months, and the snow would have covered my trail." "Maybe they came through Fort Davis and heard about the mountain man living up here alone. Maybe they put two and two together." Nathan checked the loads in all his weapons. "Or maybe it is just someone else, a drifter looking for shelter. Either way, we are not taking chances." They spent the rest of that day in a state of heightened alertness, jumping at every sound. Nathan reinforced the door and made sure the shutters on the windows could be secured from inside. He brought in extra firewood and water, preparing for the possibility that they might need to hole up. Night fell, and still nothing happened. They ate dinner in near silence, both too tense to make conversation. Nathan insisted Nora sleep while he kept watch, his rifle across his lap as he sat in the chair by the door. Around midnight, his vigilance was rewarded. He heard it, the soft crunch of snow outside, too deliberate to be an animal. Nathan moved silently to the window and peered through a crack in the shutters. 3 men stood in the yard, conferring in low voices. Even in the darkness, he could make out the glint of weapons. Nathan moved quickly to the bed and shook Nora awake, pressing his hand over her mouth to keep her from crying out. "They are here," he whispered. 3 men outside. Stay down and stay quiet." Her eyes went wide with fear, but she nodded. Nathan positioned himself by the door, his rifle ready. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He had not survived 8 years alone in these mountains by being soft. "We know she is in there," a rough voice called from outside. "The woman from the wagon. Send her out and we will leave you be. This does not have to be your fight, mountain man." Nathan said nothing, just tightened his grip on the rifle. "We will pay you," another voice added. "Good money for a woman we got a right to claim. We killed for her, and we mean to have her." The cold calculation in the man's voice made Nathan's blood boil. These were animals, and they thought of Nora as property to be claimed. He caught Nora's eye across the cabin and saw her terror, but also her trust in him. She believed he would protect her. He would not let her down. "I will count to 10, the first voice called. "Then we are coming in, willing or not. 1, 2, 3. Nathan made his decision. He could not wait for them to break down the door. Better to take the fight to them on his terms. He turned to Nora and mouthed, "Stay down." Then he threw open the door and stepped out into the snow, his rifle leveled at the 3 men standing in his yard. "You made a mistake coming here," Nathan said, his voice deadly calm. "The woman stays with me. You turn around and leave now, and I will let you walk away." The 3 men spread out, trying to flank him. Nathan kept the rifle moving, tracking each of them. They were rough-looking characters, faces hard from cruel lives. The one in the middle, clearly the leader, had a scar running from his eye to his jaw. "Big talk for one man facing 3, Scarface said. "You cannot shoot all of us before we get you." "Maybe not," Nathan agreed. "But I promise you I will kill at least 2 of you, and my money is on you being one of them. You feeling lucky?" The standoff held for a long moment. Nathan could see them calculating, weighing their odds. He kept his breathing steady, his aim unwavering. He had hunted bear and mountain lion in these hills. These men did not scare him. "She is not worth dying over," one of the other men said nervously. "We could find women in any town." "Shut up," Scarface snapped, but Nathan could see doubt creeping into his eyes. He pressed his advantage. "You have 5 seconds to start walking. After that, I start shooting. 5, 4, 3. Scarface's hand twitched toward his gun, and Nathan fired. The shot was deafening in the quiet night, and the bullet kicked up snow inches from Scarface's boots. All 3 men froze. "Next one goes through your chest," Nathan said. He had already levered another round into the chamber. "Your choice." The nervous one broke first, turning and stumbling toward the tree line. The 3rd man hesitated, then followed. Scarface stood there a moment longer, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. But finally, he too turned and walked away, calling over his shoulder, "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Nathan called back. "You come near this cabin again, I will kill you. That is not a threat. It is a promise." He stood in the snow, watching until the 3 figures disappeared into the forest. Only then did he allow himself to lower the rifle, his hands starting to shake with the aftermath of adrenaline. He had gambled that they would back down, and it had worked. But it could have gone very differently. Nathan turned to find Nora standing in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light from the cabin. He went to her and pulled her inside, securing the door behind them. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "For now, but we cannot stay here anymore. It is not safe." Nathan was already moving, gathering supplies. "We leave at first light. We will go to Fort Davis, get the law involved. Those men might come back with reinforcements." Nora nodded, understanding the necessity. They spent the rest of the night preparing, packing what they would need for the journey down the mountain. Neither of them slept. As dawn broke cold and clear, they loaded Nathan's horse and set out. The ride down to Fort Davis took most of the day. The trails were treacherous with snow, and they had to go slowly. Nathan kept his rifle ready, constantly scanning the forest around them, but they saw no sign of the outlaws. By the time the town came into view in the valley below, both of them were exhausted. Fort Davis was a small town that had grown up around the old military fort. The fort itself had been abandoned years ago, but the town persisted, serving the ranchers and homesteaders scattered across West Texas. Nathan had friends here, or at least people who knew him, and he headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Wilson was a weathered man in his 50s, who had been keeping the peace in Fort Davis for 2 decades. He listened to their story with growing anger, his jaw tightening when Nathan described the outlaws threatening Nora. "We heard about that wagon attack back in November," Wilson said. "Found the bodies of the driver and guard a few days after the storm cleared. Never found any other bodies, so we figured the passengers either got away or were taken. You say there were 3 men. 3 last night," Nathan confirmed. "But there might have been more in the original attack." Wilson nodded. "I will send word to the surrounding counties, get some deputies together. If these men are still in the area, we will find them." He turned to Nora. "Miss Baker, you are welcome to stay here in town where it is safer. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house and would be happy to take you in." But Nora shook her head, reaching for Nathan's hand. "Thank you, Sheriff, but I am staying with Nathan. We are getting married." Nathan felt a surge of pride and love as she said it so firmly, claiming him publicly. Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Well then, congratulations. Reverend Patterson can perform the ceremony if you like. He is usually available on short notice." "Today?" Nora asked, looking up at Nathan. "Could we really get married today?" Nathan thought about the cabin, about the danger still lurking in the mountains, about how fragile life was and how quickly it could be taken away. He thought about how much he loved this woman and how he did not want to waste another moment. "Today," he agreed. "Right now, if the Reverend is available." Wilson grinned. "Let me send someone to fetch him. You two clean up a bit and we will have you married within the hour." It happened faster than Nathan could have imagined. Reverend Patterson, a kind-faced man with thinning hair, met them at the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Henderson and a few other townspeople gathered as witnesses. Nathan wore his cleanest shirt and had slicked back his hair. Nora wore a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. They stood before the Reverend, hands clasped, and spoke their vows. Nathan's voice shook slightly as he promised to love and cherish Nora for the rest of his life. Nora's eyes shone with tears as she made the same promises. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with all the love and relief and joy he felt, and the small gathering of witnesses broke into applause. Nora Baker was now Nora Quinn, and Nathan felt like the luckiest man alive. They spent that night at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, in a clean room with a real bed. For the first time, they truly shared that bed, no propriety or distance between them, and Nathan discovered that love could be even better than he had imagined. Nora fit into his arms like she belonged there, and they explored this new intimacy with tenderness and passion, cementing their marriage in the most fundamental way. In the morning, they met with Sheriff Wilson again. He had news. A posse had ridden out at dawn and found the outlaws' camp in the foothills. There had been a brief gunfight and 2 of the men had been captured. The third, the one with the scar, had been killed trying to escape. "It is over," Wilson told them. "The ones we caught are wanted for a string of robberies and murders across 3 counties. They will hang before the month is out. You folks can go home and live in peace." Nathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Nora squeezed his hand, relief clear on her face. They thanked the sheriff and headed back to the boarding house to gather their few belongings. "Are you ready to go home?" Nathan asked as they prepared to leave town. Nora smiled up at him, and the love in her eyes made his heart swell. "I am ready to go anywhere as long as I am with you." They rode back up the mountain together, husband and wife, toward the cabin that would be their home. The sun shone bright on the snow, making it sparkle like diamonds. Spring was still months away, but Nathan could feel it coming in the subtle changes in the air, in the angle of the sun, in the promise of new beginnings. When they reached the cabin, Nathan lifted Nora down from the horse, and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, he scooped her up and carried her over the threshold. Inside, the cabin was cold, the fire long dead, but it did not matter. They built a new fire together, warming the space, and set about making the cabin truly theirs. Over the following weeks, they settled into married life. Nathan continued his trapping, but now he had a reason to hurry home each day. Nora transformed the cabin, adding small touches that made it warmer and more welcoming. She hung curtains she had sewn from fabric Nathan bought in town. She arranged wildflowers in jars on the windowsills. She made the small space feel like a real home. They talked late into the nights, making plans for the future. Nathan would start building the addition to the cabin as soon as the weather warmed. They would need more room, especially if children came along, a possibility that made both of them giddy with anticipation. Nora wanted to start a garden in the spring, growing vegetables to supplement their diet. Nathan talked about maybe getting a few chickens, even a milk cow if they could manage it. "We are building a real homestead here," Nora said one evening as they sat by the fire. "A real life together." "We are," Nathan agreed, pulling her close. "And it is all because a blizzard brought you to my cabin. The lonely cowboy finally has a reason to smile." Nora tilted her face up to kiss him. "I am the lucky one. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a home, a future, love. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Nathan corrected. "You saved me too, Nora. I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought an explosion of life and color to the mountains. Nathan started work on the cabin addition, and Nora planted her garden. They worked side by side, building their future together. In May, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little bit of terror. They were miles from town, miles from a doctor, but Mrs. Henderson, who had experience as a midwife, promised to come stay with them when Nora's time came. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Nathan hunted and trapped and built. Nora tended her garden and preserved food for the coming winter. Her belly grew round with their child, and Nathan would lie with his hand on it at night, feeling the baby move, marveling at the miracle of it. In early November, almost exactly a year after Nathan had found Nora in the blizzard, their son was born. Mrs. Henderson had come up to the cabin 2 weeks earlier, and she guided Nora through the difficult labor with practiced skill. Nathan stayed by his wife's side the whole time, holding her hand, offering whatever comfort he could. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and perfect, Nathan wept. They named him Samuel after Nathan's father, and Nathan held his son with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the love he felt. "Look what we made," Nora said, exhausted but radiant. "Look at our beautiful boy." Nathan leaned down to kiss her, then looked at the tiny life in his arms. "He is perfect." "You are perfect. I cannot believe how blessed I am." The first winter with a baby was challenging, but they navigated it together, learning as they went. Samuel was a healthy child with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He filled the cabin with noise and life, and an even deeper sense of purpose. Years passed in the mountains, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The cabin grew as their family grew. Nora gave birth to a daughter 2 years after Samuel, a little girl they named Alina after Nathan's mother. Then another son, Jacob, 3 years after that. The small cabin became a proper homestead, with multiple rooms, a barn for their animals, and gardens that produced enough to see them through the winters. Nathan gave up most of his trapping, focusing instead on ranching. He built up a small herd of cattle and horses, selling them in Fort Davis for good prices. Nora taught their children to read and write, giving them the education she had once planned to give other people's children. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th anniversary, Nathan and Nora stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Samuel was 10 now, tall and strong, already helping his father with the heavy work. Eleanor was 8, thoughtful and kind, with her mother's gift for making things beautiful. Little Jacob was 5, full of mischief and laughter. "Can you believe it has been 10 years since I found you in that blizzard?" Nathan asked, his arm around Nora's waist. Nora leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I cannot imagine my life without you, Nathan. I was so lonely before you came," Nathan admitted. "I did not even realize how lonely until you were here and I remembered what it felt like to be alive. You gave me back my life, Nora." "We gave each other life," Nora corrected, echoing his words from years ago. "We saved each other." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Inside the cabin, dinner waited. Around them, the homestead they had built together stood solid and strong. Below them, in the valley, Fort Davis carried on, small and distant. But here in the mountains, the Quinn family had everything they needed. That night, after the children were asleep in their beds, Nathan and Nora lay together in their own room, something they still marveled at after years of making do with the single-room cabin. Nora traced her finger along Nathan's jaw, studying his face in the moonlight coming through the window. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked softly. "I am thinking about that terrified woman running into a blizzard, certain she was going to die. I am thinking about how I could never have imagined all of this, everything we have built, everything we have become to each other. I thought I was running toward death, but I was really running toward life, toward you, toward home." Nathan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I think about that night too, about how close I came to just riding past. About how different my life would be if I had not stopped. I would still be alone, still just existing instead of living. You gave me purpose, Nora. You gave me joy. You gave me a family." "We were both lost," Nora whispered, "and we found each other in the middle of a storm. Maybe that is what love is, finding each other when we are lost and choosing to stay found." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, secure in their love and their life together. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, but inside, all was warmth and peace. More years passed. The children grew. Samuel became a fine young man, strong and capable, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind. At 19, he started courting a girl from Fort Davis, a rancher's daughter named Mary. Eleanor, at 17, was beautiful and intelligent, already receiving attention from several young men in town, though she claimed she was in no hurry to marry. Jacob, at 14, was still working on growing into his lanky frame, but he had a gift with horses that Nathan nurtured carefully. Nathan was now 50, his hair fully gray, his face deeply lined from years in the sun and wind. But he was still strong, still capable of a full day's work. Nora, at 43, had a few strands of silver in her dark hair, but she was still beautiful, still the woman who made Nathan's heart race when she smiled. They had built something lasting here in the mountains, something that would outlive them. The homestead would pass to their children and their children's children. The love they shared would echo through generations. One evening in late fall, Nathan and Nora rode up to the spot where he had first found her all those years ago. They had come here together many times over the years, marking the anniversary of that fateful night. Nathan helped Nora down from her horse, and they stood looking at the place that had changed both their lives. "I still remember exactly what I was thinking when I saw you lying in the snow," Nathan said. "I remember thinking I should just keep riding, that whatever was there was probably already dead, that I had my own survival to worry about. But something made me stop. I think part of me knew even then that you were important, that you were going to change everything." Nora took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I was so cold, Nathan, so tired. I remember giving up, deciding to just let go and let the cold take me. But then I woke up in your cabin and you were there with coffee and safety, and I knew I had been saved for a reason. I knew I was meant to find you, meant to love you, meant to build this life with you." "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Giving up your plans to be a teacher in El Paso? Spending your life in an isolated cabin instead of in a proper town?" Nora turned to face him fully, her green eyes intense. "Nathan Quinn, I have never regretted a single moment. This life, our life, is worth more than any other life I could have lived. You are worth everything. Our children are worth everything. I would not change a single thing, not even the terror of that night in the blizzard, because it brought me to you." Nathan kissed her then, deep and sweet, the way he had kissed her thousands of times over the years, but which never got old, never became routine. She was still his Nora, the woman he had saved and who had saved him in return. They rode back to the homestead as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney, and they could see light in the windows. Home. The word had a different meaning now than it had before Nora. Before, it had just been shelter, a place to sleep and eat. Now it was warmth and laughter and love. Now it was everything. The years continued to pass as years do. Samuel married his Mary and built a cabin on the far edge of the homestead property, starting his own family. They gave Nathan and Nora 4 grandchildren to dote on. Eleanor eventually married a young lawyer from Fort Davis, though she insisted on coming back to the homestead regularly, unable to fully leave the mountains that had shaped her. Jacob took over more and more of the daily operation of the ranch as Nathan aged, proving himself every bit as capable as his father. Nathan's 60th birthday arrived, and the family gathered at the homestead to celebrate. 3 generations filled the cabin and spilled out into the yard. Nathan stood on the porch, Nora beside him, and looked at what they had created together. His children, healthy and happy. His grandchildren, running and playing with the same joy his own children had shown. The land, prosperous and well-tended. "Not bad for a lonely cowboy who almost rode past a woman dying in the snow," Nora said softly, reading his thoughts as she so often did. Nathan pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made was stopping that night. Second best was asking you to marry me. Everything good in my life stems from those 2 moments. We have been so blessed," Nora agreed. "So very blessed." That night, after everyone had left and it was just the 2 of them again in the cabin that had started it all, Nathan and Nora sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. The cabin was quiet, the way it used to be before Nora arrived, but now the quiet was peaceful instead of lonely. "I was thinking," Nathan said, "about that last winter I was alone here before you came. I remember sitting right here in this very spot and thinking that this was my life. Just me and the silence and the mountains. I had accepted it. I thought I was content. But you were not," Nora said. "It was not a question. No, I was not. I was just surviving, just existing. I had convinced myself that was enough because I could not imagine anything else. And then this woman appeared in my life, literally out of a blizzard, and she showed me what it meant to truly live. What it meant to love and be loved. What it meant to have a purpose beyond just getting through each day." Nora wiped tears from her eyes. You talk about what I gave you, but Nathan, you have to understand what you gave me. I was running from men who wanted to hurt me, certain I was going to die alone and terrified. And then you appeared, this strong, kind man who asked for nothing except to help me. You could have just taken me to town and left me there, but you brought me into your home and your heart. You gave me a family when I had lost mine. You gave me roots when I was adrift. You gave me love when I thought I would never find it. They held each other as the fire burned low. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and who had built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined. Nathan lived to see all his grandchildren grown, saw Samuel's eldest son marry and start a family of his own, making him a great-grandfather. He lived to be 73 years old, a good long life for a man who had spent most of it doing hard physical labor in a harsh climate. When he finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep, in the bed he had shared with Nora for over 40 years, in the cabin where their love story had begun. Nora held his hand as he took his last breaths, whispering to him about all the adventures they had shared, all the love they had built, all the life they had lived together. She told him she would see him again, that this was not goodbye, just a temporary parting. She told him she loved him, had always loved him, would always love him. When Nathan was gone, Nora felt the loss like a physical wound, but she did not break. Nathan had given her too much strength for that. She lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, keeping Nathan's memory alive with stories of the night he had saved her from the blizzard, of the lonely cowboy who had finally found a reason to smile. She would tell them about how she had been running through the snow, certain she was going to die, and how Nathan had appeared like a guardian angel. She would tell them about waking up in the cabin, about falling in love, about the life they had built together in these mountains. She would tell them that true love was real, that it was worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth everything. When Nora finally passed at the age of 81, she was buried beside Nathan on a hill overlooking the homestead they had built together. Their graves looked out over the mountains they had both loved, over the land they had tamed and made fruitful, over the legacy they had created. The cabin still stood, maintained by their descendants who understood its importance. It had been the beginning of everything, the place where a lonely cowboy had brought a woman he had saved from a blizzard, the place where two broken people had found healing in each other. The Quinn homestead thrived for generations after Nathan and Nora were gone. Their story was passed down through the family, becoming legend. The elderly would tell their grandchildren about great-great-grandfather Nathan, who had saved great-great-grandmother Nora from certain death, about how a blizzard had brought her to his isolated cabin, about how the lonely cowboy had finally found a reason to smile. And on winter nights when the wind howled through the mountains and snow fell thick and fast, the Quinn descendants would look out at the storm and remember. They would remember that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, that sometimes being lost is the only way to be found, that sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected ways, in the midst of the fiercest storms, and changes everything. The cabin stood as a testament to that truth, solid and enduring, a monument to a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness and had grown into something that would last forever. Inside those log walls, two people had found each other, had saved each other, had loved each other with a depth and devotion that most people only dream of. Nathan Quinn had been lonely, isolated, resigned to a solitary life in the mountains. Nora Baker had been terrified, running for her life, certain she would die alone in the cold. But fate, in the form of a November blizzard in 1882, had brought them together. And in coming together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would echo through time. The lonely cowboy had indeed found his reason to smile. And that smile had lasted the rest of his life, through every challenge and every joy, through the raising of children and the building of a homestead, through decades of love and partnership and devotion. Nora had found safety and love in the arms of the man who saved her. She had found a home in the isolated cabin in the mountains. She had found a purpose in building a life with Nathan, in raising their children, in creating a legacy that would outlast them both. Their love story began with a storm and ended only when death parted them. But in between those 2 points was a life so full, so rich, so deeply lived that it became the stuff of legend. They had loved fiercely and completely, holding nothing back, giving everything to each other and to the family they created. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardships they had endured or the challenges they had faced, but the love they had shared and the life they had built together. The blizzard had brought her to his isolated cabin, and in doing so, had set in motion a chain of events that would touch generations. The lonely cowboy had finally found his reason to smile. And that smile, that love, that life they built together would never be forgotten,